April 15, 1943. Somewhere over northern France. Frost laced the canopy of Lieutenant Frank Red Evans' Republic P-47C Thunderbolt as he broke through a layer of dense grey cloud at 21,000 feet. His engine, an enormous Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, thundered like a freight train under the cowl. The cockpit shook, the altimeter spun. Evans steadied his breathing, his gloved hand gripping the throttle. "Red leader, this is Blue 2, you still with us?" crackled the radio. "Still here," Evans replied, "just trying to keep this damn bathtub in the sky." The men laughed over the intercom. The P-47 was new to the European theater, and most pilots, used to sleek Spitfires and nimble P-51s, had mixed feelings about it. German pilots, listening to captured Allied transmissions or observing the Thunderbolt's sluggish climb, had already begun to mock it. "Too heavy to fight," they said, "an American flying tank." They weren't wrong, at least not yet. The P-47 was huge, nearly twice the weight of a Messerschmitt Bf 109. With a 9-foot propeller and a jug-shaped fuselage that earned it the nickname Jug. Its sheer bulk made even Allied pilots uneasy. Evans himself had heard the jokes. The Luftwaffe pilots, confident and sharp, considered it easy prey. They called it Die Fliegende Ziegelstein, the flying brick. But this morning, as Evans pushed through the haze, searching for German bombers heading toward the English coast, he'd find out just how wrong those assumptions could be. The rumble came first, a formation of Dornier do 217s with twin tails. Their bomb bays open, behind them, streaks of grey, FW-190s, closed in, ready to protect their heavy bombers. Evans' squadron dove from altitude. The P-47s screamed down like falling anvils. Evans lined up his shot, centered the gun sight on a bomber's wing root, and squeezed the trigger. 8.50 caliber Browning M2s erupted in a deafening roar. Tracers lit the sky like molten arrows. The bomber's right wing tore open, fuel lines ruptured, flames pouring out. The Do-217 pitched sideways and exploded in midair. "Good hit, Red, good hit." But the moment was short-lived. The warning came through. "Bandits, 6 o'clock low." Evans yanked the stick, feeling the G's crush his chest. The FW-190s were already there, sleek, agile, hungry. He rolled, climbed, dove, but the German fighters danced around him like hornets. One slipped in behind. A burst of 20mm cannon shells smashed into his tail, sparks flaring. "God damn it, she's hit," Evans shouted. The P-47 lurched, smoke trailing from its fuselage. But the engine kept roaring, strong, unyielding. Evans flipped the aircraft into a shallow dive, leveled out, and throttled forward. To his amazement, the Thunderbolt didn't die. Shells had torn through the tail, punctured the wings, shredded the cowling, but the plane refused to quit. He limped across the channel, gear half locked, oil temperature spiking red, and somehow managed to crash land on the English coast. When the mechanics examined the wreck, they counted over 200 bullet holes. Evans climbed out, black with oil and grinning through exhaustion. "Too heavy to fight," he muttered. "Tell that to the bastards who couldn't shoot me down." The Thunderbolt had just proven its first point. It could take punishment like no other fighter in the sky. August 1943, Boxted Airfield, England. Morning mist rolled over the English countryside as ground crews worked in rhythmic chaos. The metallic clang of tools echoed off hangars. The smell of high-octane fuel and warm oil filled the air. Dozens of silver P-47s, freshly painted with squadron insignias and pin-up art, lined the grass strip. Captain Hub Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group paced near his aircraft. A P-47D he named Spirit of Atlantic City. N.J. Zemke had been one of the earliest critics of the Thunderbolt. He'd complained about its poor climb rate, its sluggish roll, and its tendency to gulp fuel like a whale. But he was also the man who would turn it into a legend. "Hub, they're saying Berlin by Christmas," a mechanic joked, wiping his hands. Zemke smiled thinly. "Berlin, huh? Let's see if we can make it past Bremen first." The truth was, Allied bombers, the B-17s and B-24s, were getting slaughtered. Without long-range escort, they were easy prey for the Luftwaffe once they passed beyond the range of the Spitfires. The Thunderbolt's job was to protect them, but at that point in the war, it couldn't. Its range barely reached halfway into Germany. Pilots often had to turn back while the bombers pressed on alone. Straight into the meat grinder. Something had to change. Zemke and his men began to experiment. They learned to fly high, dive fast, and use the P-47's massive weight to its advantage. While the German fighters could outturn them, they couldn't outdive them. Altitude is life insurance, Zemke told his pilots. Stay high, strike once, then get out. They called it boom and zoom. It was brutal, efficient, and terrifyingly effective. September 1943, Bremen, Germany. Sunlight glinted off the silver wings of 20 B-17s as they droned toward their target, wall-bearing factories critical to the Nazi war machine. Above them, like steel guardians, the P-47s of Zemke's 56th Fighter Group circled. Suddenly, the horizon flashed with movement, black specks diving fast. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. FW-190s and Bf-109s swarmed from the clouds. Their yellow noses flashing, the sky became chaos, contrails twisting, gunfire streaking in all directions. Zemke rolled his Thunderbolt into a dive, the altimeter spinning wildly. The airframe groaned as it approached 500 miles per hour, speeds that would rip lesser aircraft apart. A-190 tried to follow. It couldn't. The P-47, heavier and stronger, plunged like a meteor. Zemke pulled up at the last second, lined up his shot, and fired. 8.50 cals spoke at once, each one spitting a stream of death. The German fighter's canopy shattered, and it disintegrated into a cloud of debris. Splash one, Zemke barked. He climbed again, dove again, hit another. Each time, the Jug's power made it nearly untouchable in a dive. The Germans soon learned, if a Thunderbolt had the high ground, you ran, or you died. By the end of the day, the 56th Fighter Group had downed 15 German fighters for the loss of one. The Luftwaffe couldn't understand it. The flying brick had become a steel hammer. And yet, even this was only the beginning. As 1943 turned to 1944, the Thunderbolt's true transformation began, not in the air, but on the ground. The Allies were preparing for something enormous. Normandy was on the horizon. The air war was shifting. And soon, the P-47 would find its deadliest purpose, not as a fighter of the skies, but as the executioner of German armor. June 7, 1944, Normandy, France, D+1. Smoke choked the horizon. The beaches were still burning. Columns of blackened tanks lay strewn across hedgerows, their metal twisted and steaming. The sounds of war, artillery, the rumble of tanks, the cries of men, echoed through the fields of northern France. Above it all, a thunder rolled, not from the heavens, but from hundreds of engines. They came in waves. P-47 Thunderbolts, their wings streaked with invasion stripes, roared across the sky barely 50 feet above the ground. Dust and grass rippled in their wake. Each aircraft carried 2 500-pound bombs and 10 rockets, in addition to its 8.50 caliber machine guns. This was no longer the same, too heavy to fight, machine the Germans had once mocked. The Jug had evolved into something far more terrifying, a flying battering ram, designed to crush anything that moved on the ground. Lieutenant Bill Dunham, flying with the 405th Fighter Group, spotted his target, a German column retreating through a narrow road lined with trees. Half-tracks, Panzer IVs, trucks loaded with fuel. Got movement below, he called out. Looks like armor. Let's make em regret waking up today. He dove. The canopy rattled as airspeed climbed past 400 miles per hour. Dunham lined up the first truck, thumbed the bomb release, and felt the aircraft jolt as 2 500-pounders dropped away. They struck dead center. The explosion threw up a fireball that consumed the entire road. Vehicles flipped, fuel ignited, ammunition cooked off. Dunham rolled, came around again, and fired his rockets. White trails streaked forward, slamming into a Panzer at the front of the column. The tank's turret blew clean off. Then came the machine guns, 8 heavy Brownings, each capable of spitting out over 800 rounds per minute. Traces tore through metal and flesh alike. The Thunderbolt's guns didn't just damage, they obliterated. Good hits. Bill, you're lighting em up like Christmas, someone shouted over the radio. By day's end, Dunham's squadron destroyed 20 tanks, dozens of vehicles, and several locomotives. German soldiers began to fear the sound of that engine, the deep, guttural roar of the R2800. They called it Der Schlachthammer, the battle hammer. July 1944, Falaise Pocket, France. The Luftwaffe was dying. Allied air supremacy had become absolute. Now, the P-47s ruled the skies, not to duel, but to destroy. Day after day, squadrons swept across France, Belgium, and the Low Countries, hunting anything that moved. Trains were blown apart mid-run, tanks turned to smoldering husks, and entire German supply convoys were reduced to ash. On the ground, Wehrmacht soldiers whispered prayers when they heard that deep, distinctive growl. Some even surrendered to Allied ground troops out of sheer terror, claiming, "We could no longer move. The Thunderbolts come, and everything dies." At an Allied command post outside St. Lo, Major General Elwood Quesada, head of IX Tactical Air Command, studied reconnaissance photos showing trails of destroyed vehicles. "This," he said quietly, pointing to the black smears where columns once were, "this is what victory looks like." He turned to his aide. "Tell Zemke's boys, they've just rewritten air warfare." For the men who flew the Jug, the war had become personal. They'd been mocked, doubted, and laughed at. Now, they were legends. But the price was steep. Each mission meant flying through walls of flak so thick it turned daylight into night. Dozens of pilots never came back. Still, they kept flying. Because by the summer of 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't just an airplane. It was the iron wool of the Allied airmen, forged into aluminium and fire, pounding the Nazi war machine into dust. And as the war thundered east toward Germany, the Luftwaffe was about to discover that the worst was yet to come. December 23, 1944, Western Germany. The Ardennes. Snow fell thick and silent across the forested ridges of the Ardennes. The trees were skeletal, the roads clogged with abandoned vehicles. It was the height of the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate gamble to break the Allied front and reclaim the initiative. And at dawn, the clouds finally broke. The Luftwaffe had prayed for bad weather to shield their movements. But now, with clear skies, came the unmistakable roar, hundreds of engines, echoing across the frozen valleys. The Thunderbolts had returned. Captain Ben Mayo of the 362nd Fighter Group banked his P-47D through the smoke-streaked sky, his breath fogging inside the canopy. Below him, German armor rolled through the snow-covered fields toward Bastogne, Tiger tanks. Half-tracks, trucks, all crawling like steel beetles. "All right, boys," he said over the radio. "Time to show 'em what winter thunder sounds like." The formation broke. Mayo dove, throttling forward until the vibration of the R2800 blurred the instruments. His gun sight steadied on the lead Tiger. Click. 8 Brownings thundered in perfect unison, spitting fury. Tracer lines walked across the tank's engine deck. Then, 2 rockets slammed home. The Tiger vanished in a pillar of black smoke. Its turret flung 30 feet into the air. "Target destroyed," Mayo called, moving on the next one. He was already rolling, lining up for another pass. All around him, the white Ardennes landscape lit up with fire and explosions as squadron after squadron of Thunderbolts rained destruction on the German columns. On the ground, Oberleutnant Karl Fischer, a panzer commander, scrambled from his immobilized tank. He stared upward, dazed, as P-47s streaked overhead, their wings glinting in the pale sun. The roar was deafening, an unholy growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The snow kicked up around him as bullets chewed through the ground. "Run!" someone screamed. But it didn't matter. The Thunderbolts circled like predators, each pass slicing deeper into the retreating German line. The once proud panzer divisions, veterans of Kursk and Kharkov, were shredded in hours. When the smoke cleared, the road to Bastogne was littered with burning metal. Fischer collapsed in the snow, staring at the sky. "It is not war," he muttered to himself. "It is extermination." By Christmas, the Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Its airfields were in ruins, its pilots either dead or too few to matter. The German High Command began issuing desperate reports, coded pleas that read more like obituaries. Ground movements impossible in daylight. Enemy fighter bombers dominate. Panzers destroyed before engagement. No cover, no hope. The Jug, the aircraft once mocked as a fat, clumsy brute, had become the single greatest destroyer of German armor and logistics in the European theater. January 1945, somewhere over the Rhine. The Thunderbolt's silhouette now carried mythic weight among both friend and foe. When Allied troops advanced, they looked to the sky for that familiar shape, broad wings, barrel fuselage, the steady thunder of its engine. "Here come the Jugs," the infantry would say, smiling through the mud and snow. "We're gonna make it." By the war's end, the numbers were staggering. Over 7,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. More than 9,000 locomotives and railcars. 86,000 trucks, tanks, and armored vehicles annihilated. And yet, what statistics could never capture was what the P-47 truly represented. It was not sleek like the Spitfire, not elegant like the Mustang. It was brutal, relentless, unforgiving. It was, in every sense, American industrial warfare given wings. In April 1945, When the last German strongholds collapsed, Thunderbolts still prowled the skies, bombing, strafing, covering the final Allied push across the Rhine. And as the smoke cleared over Europe, one truth remained. The same German pilots who had once laughed at the flying brick now feared to even whisper its name. Because when the Jug came for you, it didn't fight fair. It fought to end wars. May 1945, Kassel, Germany. The airfield was quiet now. Wrecked aircraft lay twisted and rusting along the perimeter. Captain Frank "Red" Evans, the same man who'd barely limped home 2 years earlier, walked across the cracked runway toward his old Thunderbolt. Its paint was faded, its body riddled with patched bullet holes. He ran his hand along the metal skin and smiled. She'd brought him through fire, through flak, through hell itself. Mechanics had called her ugly. The Germans had called her a joke. But she had outlasted them all. Years later, historians would call the P-47 the most rugged single-engine fighter of the war. Its pilots would simply call it the Jug, a name spoken with pride, reverence, and a touch of fear. Because the men who flew it knew something the world had learned too late. You don't need grace to win a war. You need power. You need will. You need something that can take a punch, and still come back swinging. And that's exactly what the P-47 Thunderbolt was. The Germans mocked it. The Allies mastered it. And history remembers it as the flying hammer that broke the spine of the Reich.